Cheers and salutations. Welcome one and all to Americans Learn. Today, we're going right back to Poland. That's right. We're going with Eastory, History of Poland, the Deluge, 1655 to 1660. Ooh la la, what a fantastic era that was. No, probably wasn't, because I'd probably die of some kind of disease, or I'd get stabbed or shot or hung by a high lord or something like that. But nonetheless, we here at American Learns always encourage one thing. We ask everyone to please support the original content creator. Please support the original content creator. Let's say that again for the people in the back. Support the original content creator because it's the right thing to do. So without further ado, since I'm in charge of the ones and twos for Americans Learn, we're going to check out Eastory. We're going to laugh at some funny imagery. History of Poland. I know my grandpa, rest in peace. I miss you, Richard. Would love this. So let's enjoy some Polish history and enjoy it. So let's get ready in a 3, a 2, a 1.
2 men, 1 goal. Only one will emerge victorious. In the red corner we have John Casimir, the legitimate king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So far, his reign has been disastrous.
Oh, I'm sorry, buddy.
Due to internal revolts and foreign invasions, the Commonwealth has lost most of its territory and John Casimir himself was exiled.
Oh.
In the blue corner is one of the invaders, Charles Gustav, the King of Sweden, with one of the most modern armies in Europe.
Yes, and no, none of their stuff is made from IKEA. Or the dreaded forever IKEA. Only those initiated know what I'm talking about.
Dissenting nobles offered Charles Gustav to become the king of the Commonwealth, and as a result what was left of the country acknowledged his authority.
Oh.
In this episode, John Casimir and Charles Gustav will clash over the kingdom of Poland. But how did it come to be that Charles Gustav, the king of Sweden, also became the king of the Commonwealth? In 1655, the Commonwealth was unable to stop the Cossack revolt and the Russian invasion. At that time, Sweden invaded the country from the west. The Swedish army was one of the best in Europe. The situation was desperate. However, the nobles had an idea. If they acknowledged the Swedish king as their overlord, not only would they not have to fight the Swedish army, but they could use the Swedish army's help to recover the lands lost to Russia and the Cossacks.
I had nothing to do with that. I don't know why that happened.
So Charles Gustav was acknowledged as the Commonwealth's king by the nobles, and his forces occupied the remaining parts of the Kingdom of Poland. But there was a flaw in this plan. Charles Gustav was not interested in ruling the Commonwealth as its monarch and helping to restore its lands. His real goals were to annex the lands near the Baltic Sea into Sweden and also plunder the Commonwealth's territory. Instead of helping the Commonwealth in the war, the Swedish army started looting the country clean of valuables. The Commonwealth's people became disappointed in the Swedish rule, and the tensions between the Protestant Swedish army and mostly Catholic Poles began to flare up. An anti-Swedish guerrilla campaign spread in the countryside, and many of the nobles considered defecting back to John Casimir. The Swedes' control over the country was weakened. John Casimir saw this as an opportunity and returned.
Like I was looking through the telescope, like, yes, opportunity. Yes, finally, my win.
To the Commonwealth to lead the revolt against the Swedes. On paper, the Swedish forces were large, but the Commonwealth's nobles were disgruntled by the Swedish rule and refused to fight. Most of the Swedish army had to be dispersed in many garrisons to fight off guerrillas, and Charles Gustav was only able to field a small mobile force. He relied on...
See, now, this is stupid on Charles' part, because, like, look, if you're coming in as a foreign power, you got to win hearts and minds. You just can't be looting stuff. Like, after all, what we learned from Belisarius from Epic History. That's right. I'm going to reference another video we checked out here. Belisarius told his Roman soldiers, hey, don't be looting the people's homes. You're going to murder somebody while you're drunk? Well, guess what? I'm going to hang you. That's just how it is.
Speed and aggression to crush the revolt. He quickly marched out to quell the rebellion before it could grow large and pushed into the territory controlled by John Casimir. However, by that time, John Casimir's army was far larger than the Swedish force. They chased the Swedes back and at one point managed to encircle Charles Gustav's army. Eventually, the Swedes managed to break free and regroup in Warsaw. It was clear to Charles Gustav that he needed a much larger army to defeat John Casimir, and he went abroad to raise one. Witnessing the success of the revolt, Most of the Commonwealth nobles defected to John Casimir, and from now on, the Swedish control over Poland relied only on their garrisons. John Casimir's forces took Warsaw. By that time, Charles Gustav was back with a decent-sized force. His plan was to use the quality of his troops to destroy John Casimir's army in battle. John Casimir was aware of the quality of the Swedish army, but he had gained several advantages. He had united the Commonwealth nobles behind him, and his forces had a considerable numerical advantage over the Swedes.
Come on, Poland, you could do it.
Also, having Warsaw behind them benefited the morale of his army. He hoped that with the help of these advantages, he would best the Swedes on the battlefield. The battle ended in a Swedish victory, and they entered Warsaw, but they weren't able to inflict heavy casualties on John Casimir's army. In this situation, neither side could achieve full victory. Both sides changed strategies. John Casimir still had many more men than Charles Gustav. He planned to use it to engage the Swedes in a large number of smaller engagements, where the Swedish advantages in tactics and firepower were smaller, and ultimately defeat the Swedish army in a war of attrition. Charles Gustav's main problem was the lack of manpower. Bringing a massive army of mercenaries to the region was too expensive and would take too much time. The Commonwealth's neighbors had many troops nearby, but Charles Gustav still had to pay them somehow. Well, he could pay them by
Bitcoin or credit card. Sure thing, why not?
allocating them land in Poland that they would conquer together. So he decided to draw in the smaller nations by partitioning the Commonwealth between its smaller neighbors. Brandenburg, Transylvania, and the Cossacks answered his call. Sweden would keep the lands near the sea. The Elector of Brandenburg would get northwest, the Cossacks would get the east, and the Prince of Transylvania would get the rest. John Casimir's forces were clearly outmatched. He had only bad options. He could meet the invading armies in battle, but the odds of victory were small, and if he was defeated, he could lose most of his army.
Yeah.
That would mean losing the war.
True.
On the other hand, he could harass the enemy forces and keep his army together as long as possible and hope for the best. But this would only postpone his ultimate defeat, as it would make his lands fully exposed to the invaders, and it would only be a question of time until the Commonwealth's population would be plundered.
Actually, if you loot a lot, I will surrender. Oh, come on, Poland. Come on.
Into submission. He chose the latter option. In the next year, the Allies invaded the Commonwealth. John Casimir's forces were not able to contain their advance. The Cossacks and the Transylvanians moved in from the south and went towards Krakow. On their way, they put the Lesser Poland to fire and sword. After reinforcing the Swedish garrison in Krakow, they moved north to meet up with the Swedish army. Having joined forces with the Swedes, their combined army now marched through central Poland, burning and looting on their path. They established a garrison in the region. Finally, they turned their sights at Warsaw, which John Casimir's forces had regained in the meantime. The Allies moved in and took the town without much trouble. The campaign so far had been a success, and in time the Allies would be able to gain full control over Poland. The Swedish successes had antagonized many of the European powers, and by that time Sweden found itself in a war with Russia, Denmark, and the Holy Roman Emperor.
Okay.
This was more than Sweden could manage, but Charles Gustav knew the solution to this problem. He had to knock one of its enemies out of the war fast. The question was, which one? Russia and the Holy Roman Emperor were too large to defeat quickly, and he had to choose between the Commonwealth and Denmark. Sweden was winning the war against the Commonwealth, but with John Casimir not willing to make peace, it would still take some years to conquer it completely. Charles Gustav left a strong garrison in his partition of the Commonwealth and chose to attack Denmark.
Oh.
The Danes thought that Charles Gustav would bring his army back to Sweden to defend his country from the Danish invasion and position their troops accordingly. But Charles Gustav took another route from the south.
Oh.
He surprised the Danish defenders and easily took over Jutland, but was separated from the rest of Denmark by the Danish Straits. Unfortunately for the Danes, the winter that year had proved to be especially cold, and the straits froze.
It's like -8 outside right now in Chicago. I don't want to go outside, but I actually have to. There's a promise that I have to follow through with.
Swedes crossed the sea on ice, and soon the Swedish army was before Copenhagen, the Danish capital. Confronted with the possibility of losing his capital, the King of Denmark offered Charles Gustav many of his lands in return for peace. Just as he planned, Charles Gustav had quickly knocked Denmark out of the war. But things were going bad for Sweden in the Commonwealth. John Casimir's decision to keep his army intact had proven to be the right one.
Good.
With Swedish army gone, Sweden's allies were not able to match the strength of the Commonwealth's army. Faced with unfavorable odds, the Transylvanians began their retreat from Warsaw to regroup in the south. John Casimir's forces followed and harassed them on the march, and finally the whole force was surrounded. In return for a safe passage home, the Prince of Transylvania agreed to leave the Swedish alliance and relinquish all of his conquests.
Wow.
Transylvania was out of the war.
Good.
Now it was time to deal with Brandenburg. Brandenburg's army was similar to that of Sweden, and here John Casimir resorted to diplomacy instead of warfare. Officially, the East Prussian domains of Brandenburg were owned by the Commonwealth, and Brandenburg administered them as a vassal. John Casimir offered Brandenburg full control over East Prussia if it was to change the sides in the war. Brandenburg agreed and pulled back its forces and declared war on Sweden. By that time, the army of the Holy Roman Emperor arrived in the region. Now Sweden's enemies on the southern coast of the Baltic Sea heavily outnumbered the Swedish army, and despite knocking Denmark out of the war, Sweden's position had not improved.
Uh-oh. The Swedish meatballs may not be enough this time around. To our viewing members in Sweden, we mean no disrespect. We love you. We truly do.
It seemed that Sweden would not be able to win the war, but Charles Gustav was still optimistic and looked for
You know, I should be more mature and not laugh at all of this funny stuff, but hey, why not?
the target he could strike next. A campaign in the southern Baltic did not promise easy victory, but there was a place where achieving victory was more than probable. It was Denmark. Swedish forces occupied a lot of the country since the previous war, and all the land Denmark directly controlled besides its Norwegian domains was the area around its capital. Charles Gustav decided to take Copenhagen, and this time not only knock Denmark out of the war, but also out of existence, and annex the Danish mainland into Sweden. He landed his army near Copenhagen and began the siege. But then the Dutch joined the war against Sweden and sent their fleet to help Copenhagen.
Oh, wow.
With a stream of reinforcements and supplies coming to Copenhagen, Charles Gustav was not able to take the town. At the same time, they were unable to leave the Danish islands due to the naval blockade. Meanwhile, the coalition's forces captured many of Sweden's fortresses on the southern Baltic. They
All right, Poland is striking back. Much love. There you go. My grandpa would love this.
also moved into Denmark and
Rest in
slowly
peace, Rich.
pushed the Swedish army out of most of the country. Sweden had lost many of its conquests. Then Charles Gustav fell ill and died. The new Swedish government decided to cut their losses and make peace. By that time, Sweden had still retained some of their fortresses in their partition of the Commonwealth, but they had lost their possessions in Germany. They agreed to trade their fortresses in the Commonwealth for the return of their domains in Germany, and soon the last Swedish soldiers left the Commonwealth and the Swedish invasion was over. John Casimir had won. He hadn't managed to best the Swedish army on the battlefield, but he was able to outlast the Swedish war effort and had gained full control over Poland. But his work was far from complete. Russia and the Cossacks still controlled more of the Commonwealth's territory than the Commonwealth itself, and he was determined to take it back.
As he
When
should.
that was done, it was necessary to make it so that the Commonwealth would never again fall victim to another deluge. But that in the next episode. Thanks to the cast and crew for making this episode possible. Sorry for being on the late side with this one. I found the original version of the episode to be too fast and intense and had to fully remake it. More than a week was lost. Do you find this video still to be too fast to follow? Or maybe too slow? Let me know in the comments. Also, I have something really special about World War II in store for you in March. See you next time.
All right. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. All right. Eastery. What more can I say that hasn't been said already? Outstanding in regards to history, breaking it down, making it simple, but also informative and makes you want to know more. Now, of course, I'm curious to know more about the history of Poland. kind of hits my heartstrings because my grandpa, I still have a couple of his books upstairs in his living room, where he, before he passed away, he had a lot of books on the history of Poland. Those things meant that those subjects really meant a lot to him because he really liked studying Polish history. He spoke Polish fluently. He knew how to speak it well. He was somebody that I really respect and admire. And I think he would really like the animation of this video. So, you know what I'm going to say? 10 out of 10. This was an outstanding video. And I love it 100%. So, thank you, Eastery, for doing such great work. And you know what all of you hip cool cats can do? In the description box below, as a favor for me, please support the original content creator. We do that for all the videos here for Americans Learn, and we would appreciate it if you guys and gals would do that. Now, look, it's getting really cold outside. It's -8. It's nighttime. And I have a promise that I have to follow through on. So it's never an easy day, but I have to follow through because it's always important to do some follow through. So I hope that the second week of the new year has been treating you well. Be safe. All the best to you. Keep your heads on a swivel. Drink water. And I'll see all you hip cool cats on the flip side. Peace.